U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper warned that U.S. alliances, including the future of NATO, were in jeopardy if European countries went ahead with using Chinese Huawei technology in their 5G networks.
The company is deeply tied not only to China, but to the Chinese Communist Party.
We have shipped more than 600,000 5G AAUs over 91 commercial 5G contracts.
Where the reality we face as a nation is of ever-increasing cyber warfare and seemingly ceaseless variations of intense, perhaps even weaponized economic competition.
In June 2019, Keith Krach, former CEO of DocuSign, was unanimously confirmed by the Senate to run U.S. economic diplomacy as Undersecretary of State.
This Ohio boy, who began his journey welding parts and later had the good fortune of welding together billion-dollar companies, has had the blessing of a true all-American dream.
The Silicon Valley billionaire would take on the Chinese Communist Party, and one of its urgent missions was to defeat their master plan for controlling the future of 5G communications.
The laws of the jungle have changed. Speed now is the #1 currency.
Every element of our national strength must be brought to bear on this task. Our ideals, our entrepreneurial drive, our industrious spirit, and our insistence on fair play.
Failure's not an option.
Welcome to a very special edition of Zooming in China. I'm Simone Gao. In this 3-episode series, we'll tell a story about an important battle between America and China that could reshape the world order in a significant way. It started from Huawei, China's biggest telecommunications company's ambition to take over the future of 5G communications. It then evolved into a grand battle between freedom and authoritarianism. Can America win? Let's start in the winter of 2017, when the protagonist of our story had an important trip to China. On December 6, 2017, China's southern port city Guangzhou held its much-anticipated Fortune Brainstorm Tech International Conference. It is a meeting for the world's top technology leaders to discuss major trends and build business relationships with China. 5 of China's Politburo members attended the meeting and gave speeches. Also there was DocuSign's then CEO Keith Krach on his way to building a $40 billion global powerhouse. At the time, like many big CEOs, Krach was exploring whether China should be part of its DocuSign empire. After all, this is one of the biggest consumer markets in the world. However, the conference had an unexpected impact on Mr. Krach.
Well, I first went to China in 1981, and I went there many times on business over the years. I always deeply admired the Chinese culture and the history, but it soon became apparent that this time it was different. I could see the overt propaganda of the Chinese Communist Party and an aggression that forebode a new set of rules were at play. It was the first time I saw their drone swarm technology and heard about the One Belt, One Road, and it looked like a military supply chain to me. The guys with the best technology win the war. These guys were catching up. And if the CCP has malign intentions, then the US and our allies, we're going to be caught flat-footed. I was thinking, I wonder what the folks in Washington think about this. And who's leading the government's technology strategy?
Mr. Krach returned home without forming a joint venture in China. Instead, he felt he needed to share firsthand with the officials in Washington, D.C. what he had seen and to see if the U.S. and its allies had a plan. He flew the following week to D.C. and, never being involved in politics, visited his only acquaintance in town, Vice President Mike Pence, when Mr. Krach was chairman of Purdue University.
I knew no one except for VP Pence because I hired I knew him when he was the governor of Indiana. And I hired the governor of Indiana to be the president of Purdue, Mitch Daniels. He was former director of OMB. I went out to Washington. I just wanted to see if they knew what was going on. And I told him what I saw. And he goes, have you ever thought about serving your country? And my response was, that's a dream I never knew I had. He goes, can you move? I go, I can move anywhere in the world.
Mr. Krach grew up in a small town in Ohio. His father was a German immigrant who owned a small business.
I was working in my dad's 5-person machine shop. Actually, the first job was cleaning the sinks, cleaning the toilets. You know, then I worked up to being a welder, and then I worked up to working on the machines. The big customers were the automotive companies, and when their business went down, ours just went absolutely flat. And I remember a year where it was just my dad and me, we were the only employees. And to watch how tough that is, but also to watch his resiliency in terms of that.
His father dreamed that he would get some college knowledge and return as an engineer to help him grow the machine shop into a big company of 10 employees. While Kroc did become an engineer, he never went back to work with his dad in Ohio. He went to work for the biggest company in the world at that time, General Motors, which his father has taken to calling Generous Motors after they gave Kroc a full-ride scholarship to Purdue University and Harvard Business School. Upon graduation, Kroc went to GM where they put him on the executive fast track, but Kroc eventually left GM for Silicon Valley and embarked on a journey to build massive corporations one after another. This is such an incredible journey that you went through. At age 26, you became the youngest VP in General Motors history, co-founded GMF Robotics to become the world's biggest industrial robot manufacturer. Then you left GM to help run a Silicon Valley startup and later sold it for $500 million. Then joined Benchmark Capital to found the first B2B e-commerce company, Ariba, and grew it to $40 billion. And before you became Undersecretary of State, spent 10 years growing DocuSign into a $40 billion powerhouse. So for most of us, if you land a job as VP of GM at age of 26, you are set. Why leave and start over and over again in Silicon Valley?
Well, Simone, my friends thought I was crazy leaving Mother General Motors back then. And you can imagine what a dream come true it was. Something happened while I was running that robotics unit, making all those trips out to Silicon Valley. You know, in my eyes, Silicon Valley was the West Point of capitalism. And the objective of the game was to reinvent everything, innovate at scale. It was also a land where failure is recognized as the best teacher. And I had tasted failure right out of the gate. And that scary failure taught me a tremendous lesson about the importance of values like integrity and trust. You know, I learned not to be afraid to jump in water over my head. And even though it's scary, it's also an adrenaline rush. And after a while, it becomes fun. And it even becomes addicting. And when you become addicted to it, you just have to disrupt and challenge the status quo wherever you are, whatever you're doing. And I don't know, maybe that's the first step to becoming a transformational leader.
In 2019, the nation's capital did need the disruptors. He was sent over to the State Department and later nominated to run economic diplomacy for the United States. As the Undersecretary of State, he knew his focus would be China.
I fully appreciate the enormity and gravity of this role, especially in a time where the reality we face as a nation is of ever-increasing cyber warfare and seemingly ceaseless variations of intense, perhaps even weaponized economic competition. Our rivals are playing the long game, and they're playing for keeps. A four-dimensional game of economic, military, diplomatic, and cultural chess with little respect for human rights, intellectual property, international law, transparency, the environment, or sovereignty of nations. In order to prevail, we must play the game better and take economic statecraft to the next level. There is no substitute for American diplomacy.
To Kroc, the battle to gain economic fairness is also personal.
Growing up in Ohio, I was brought up with good old-fashioned Midwestern values. If you were honest and you worked hard enough, any dream you had could come true. And my childhood experience in a machine shop gave me a love for manufacturing. And my dad would always explain how vital small companies like his were to American industry because they were the heart and soul of the U.S. economic engine. My dad taught me that the key to America's manufacturing prowess was fair competition in the marketplace. That drives productivity, which increases the standard of living. He would always say, this is the beauty of free enterprise. Over the years, it was painful for me to watch the devastation of the manufacturing business in the Midwest. then I could see China Inc.'s weapons of mass production using state subsidies, currency manipulation, all kinds of things that systematically targeted one industry after another. When you've got to do that joint venture in China to have access to the big market, coercive force tech transfer just happens. And when you build a plant, that means not only handing over the blueprints, but also the process engineering know-how as you train their workforce. I believe in the beauty of the free market system, but when somebody comes in the market and doesn't play fairly by the rules, then the market is no longer free.
The rise of Huawei was the fulfillment of decades of careful planning. Supported by the CCP, Huawei benefited from state protection against foreign competitors, billions in funding from the Chinese government, as well as forced technology transfers and well-documented instances of outright technology theft. Huawei leadership and the CCP spent years maneuvering the company into this position. Huawei was founded in 1987 by Ren Zhengfei, a veteran of the People's Liberation Army's Engineering Corps. Many of the company's crucial first contracts were with the Chinese army. As Huawei grew, it benefited from both state support and forced technology transfers from foreign companies. And several cases of technology theft also drove the company's rise, including the well-documented theft of router software from Cisco. Washington officials from both parties feared that Beijing could control and even deny the US and its allies access to the 5G networks that make global commerce and the projection of military power possible. By early 2020, the world was convinced it was too late to prevent 5G vendors sponsored by the Chinese Communist Party from dominating the next generation of global telecommunications. In January 2020, the UK's decision to allow Huawei into its 5G network sparked tensions between London and the Trump administration. In an interview with a CNBC reporter, Vice President Pence did not hide its disappointment with the British government's decision.
Well, I think the president's been very clear. Secretary of State Pompeo reiterated it this week. The United States is very disappointed. We just don't believe that utilizing the assets, the technology of Huawei is consistent with the security or privacy interests of the UK, of the United States. It remains a real issue between our two countries.
It was clear that both sides of the aisle were united on the urgency of the Huawei threat, particularly on February 14th when House Speaker Nancy Pelosi echoed Vice President Pence during a heated exchange with the People's Congress of China leader at the 2020 Munich Security Conference.
This is so predictable. I don't know why it's not so self-evident to everyone that you do not want to give that power to an entity created by the People's Liberation Army to have that line of communication, 5G, dominated by an autocratic government that does not share our values.
Hello, I'm from the National People's Congress of China. My knowledge of how the world works is that technology is a tool. And China, since its reform started 40 years ago, have introduced all kinds of Western technologies. Microsoft, IBM, Amazon, they are all active in China. All the technologies came from Western countries, from the developed world. China has maintained its political system. The system led by the Communist Party has become successful. It's not threatened by the technologies. How come if Huawei's technology with 5G is introduced into Western countries, then it will threaten the political system? Do you really think the democratic system is so fragile that it could be threatened by this single high-tech company of Huawei?
Let me just say to you that are applauding back there that Huawei was created by reverse technology of American initiatives. That was one of the main ways that they got started. We know the capability that Huawei has. We do not want to emulate the Chinese system. We don't want to be arresting millions of Uyghurs, threatening this Tibet in terms of its culture, religion, and faith, undermining democracy in Hong Kong, etc. So it isn't a question of we have Huawei and we are a model, so why are you afraid of Huawei? We understand the power of technology, and I tell you unequivocally, without any hesitation, be very careful when we go down this path unless you want to end up with a society like China.
Despite the warnings from the US leadership, Huawei's leadership position and momentum seemed unbeatable. A week after Pelosi spoke at the Munich Security Conference, at a press conference in London, Huawei's president of carrier business Ryan Dean announced this.
We have shipped more than 600,000 5G AAUs over 91 commercial 5G contracts.
Out of the 91 countries who signed up for Huawei's 5G, 47 of them were from Europe. Most of them are US allies. They have been talking about this threat of Huawei for a long time. Why didn't it work? Why didn't the allies listen to them?
You know, it was interesting because I remember when I first came into government, you know, just a little over a year and a half ago. And they said, hey, you got to go over to the Italian embassy, your counterparts there, the economic minister, and we want you to have a pull aside and have the 5G talk with them. I go, well, what's the 5G talk? And they said, well, tell them don't buy Huawei. I go, well, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. I go, where I come from in Silicon Valley, you don't even mention your competitor's name. You know, somebody says, don't buy that. You go to your chief of staff. Hey, check out Huawei. It must be pretty good. So we based it on internationally, you know, accepted trust standards. That was really the key point. And I think up to this point, the Americans were going over and banging on the tables and saying, don't buy Huawei. Nobody likes to be told what to do.
Upon realizing America's prior 5G diplomacy was flawed, Keith Krach did something that was unprecedented in Washington, D.C.
What we said is, well, let's just treat all these countries and all these telcos as customers. And the customer's always right.
In order to serve the customers better, Keith insisted that his team first go on a listening tour, conducting dozens of bilateral meetings with international counterparts. When the discussion turned to China, ministers repeatedly affirmed one thing.
Foreign ministers, economic ministers, finance ministers, their deputies, more than 60 bilateral meetings with my foreign counterparts. And it seemed like almost all the countries were terrified of China. Nobody even wanted to use the words China or Huawei. The big aha came when I asked about their relationship with China. And they'd say, well, they're an important trading partner for sure. But then they'd lean in and they go, but we don't trust them. This happened over and over again. That's when I told the team, we're gonna make our strategic positioning all about trust. Nobody trusts these guys. All I know is that trust is the most important word in any language.
Trust is the basis of every relationship, business, personal, or otherwise. And, you know, if you ask me to sum up DocuSign in one word, it's trust.
Krach's pattern recognition told him it all boiled down to trust. Despite seeming unstoppable, he understood Huawei was vulnerable because nobody trusts them. Krach had a proven track record of transforming industries by constructing global networks at massive scale. He had used the same playbook for the past 40 years, disrupting high-tech markets. It was one of his most strategic assets. Before, he deployed it to create category kings. This time, he wields it to defend home.
What we've done at all the companies is what we affectionately call the playbook. And that's the vision, the mission, the values, the team rules, the long-term goals, the strategy, and the execution, like upside-down triangle, because you can have the greatest strategy in the world, but if you can't execute, you're going to fail every time. And if you have maybe a pretty good strategy, but you cannot execute, you're going to win every time.
In order to accomplish the playbook's three fundamental objectives, the strategic imperative was defeat the CCP's master plan to dominate 5G, deliver an enduring model for competing with China Inc. for all sectors, use 5G as a beachhead to build an alliance of democracies and companies.
It brought over from Silicon Valley 12 private sector. And if there's anything that we knew, is that everybody wants to go with the leader and you want to buy from the leader. And in a rapidly changing market, leadership is not defined by size, it's defined by momentum. So the objective of the game was to take away the momentum from Huawei. And in order to do that, we needed an opening salvo to get them backpedaling because they were being proactive and the rest of the world was being reactive. And so that opening salvo was what the press later called the 5G trifecta.
May 15 marked the first day for the 5G trifecta's barrage of announcement when the world's high-tech sector woke up hearing a surprising piece of news.
Taiwanese chip giant TSMC has finalized its plan to build a 12-inch wafer fab in Phoenix, Arizona. The project was approved at a board of directors meeting on Tuesday.
TSMC's decision to construct its $12 billion state-of-the-art 5-nanometer semiconductor manufacturing plant represents the biggest onshoring in United States history. TSMC will create 1,600 high-tech jobs and is expected to bring its ecosystem of suppliers.
They, for sure, are the most important foreign company to United States national security. They might even be the most important. I mean, you got defense companies, but they are critical. They're head and shoulders above everybody else in terms of fabricating the world's most sophisticated semiconductors, which are the basis for everything from 5G to AI, everything. That was a big deal, and we were able to close that in 2 weeks. There was a lot of discussion. There was a lot of analytical work. We had a great team working on that. And we had two theories that if we could get them to announce that they were going to build a plant in the U.S., two things would happen. One, it would be a catalyst for Congress to put some serious funding into bringing our semiconductor manufacturing back to the U.S. We said do all the manufacturing here, and now it's only like 12%. And you really need that manufacturing base to develop the next generation of equipment. So it was strategic. It was more than just having it sourced in the United States. And so that's when we worked with Senator Corrin and Senator Warner, total bipartisan, on the CHIP Act. And that was for $30 billion. And that passed unanimously in the House and 96-4 in the Senate. That was a big win. The second theory that we had was that it would be a catalyst to get the other semiconductor companies to onshore. And indeed, that did happen. Matter of fact, I think Samsung's going to even build one even bigger than that. And we knew they were waiting in the wings. Also for the U.S. chip manufacturers, because the U.S. chip manufacturers had moved like building in Israel, Ireland, Malaysia, and we got a lot of proposals. So I'm sure the team back in Washington is working on that right now. So both those theories really proved out. It was really a catalyst.
TSMC is Huawei's sole provider for advanced processing chips, which it needs for 5G and sophisticated smartphones. It was a critical step in securing the semiconductor supply chain and 5G security for the United States and its allies. But Team USA did not stop here.
The Clean Path program, which basically calls for any network traffic coming in and out of diplomatic facilities, whether it's here or abroad, all our embassies, it requires a clean path. So in other words, it's trusted, it's reliable, it cannot have touched, for example, a Huawei antenna.
This is the second strike of the 5G trifecta. It marked the beginning of the Clean Path rollout beyond just the State Department. The announcement encouraged all like-minded countries and companies to join the U.S. in requiring a 5G clean path for their facilities. The genius behind the clean path strategy was raising the cost for the telco operators who were contemplating Huawei 5G.
Let's say you're a telco operator and you have Huawei. It means you gotta put a Ericsson or Nokia or Samsung antenna right next to you. In essence, got to double your cost. And so that was raising the cost for the telco operators. You know, if we could have done it for all United States, we would have, but we could only start with what we could control, and that was United States State Department. Now I think you'll see it roll out with all the different U.S. agencies. We got some countries to come on board as well. So it's getting up to a critical mass of network traffic.
News just breaking now on Huawei. Reuters is reporting that the Trump administration will further tighten restrictions on the Chinese company. That report says the Commerce Department will move to prevent Huawei from obtaining semiconductors without a special license. That includes chips made by foreign firms developed or produced using U.S. software or technology. The report says the new actions are aimed at preventing Huawei from circumventing U.S. export controls.
This is the third prong of the 5G trifecta. By teaming up with the Commerce Department again, the State Department team succeeded in blocking Huawei's access to advanced semiconductors required for 5G and sophisticated smartphones. It would be so successful that Huawei was forced to sell their smartphone business used with 5G 6 months later.
Up to this point, we were just focusing on the U.S. semiconductor companies don't ship, but they were getting semiconductors, particularly from TSMC and other countries, Samsung. And so we were able to put export controls on those companies because the United States controls the semiconductor machinery business, the equipment business, and also the design. So that was a way to be able to really loop in everybody. So it really just cut them off for the most sophisticated 5G semiconductors, and also for their phone business, which was their cash cow. They had to sell their phone business because they were running out of chips.
After the initial barrage of the 5G trifecta, Keith Krach and his team initiated a global campaign to build a new alliance of democracies.
The laws of the jungle have changed. It is about speed. Speed now is the #1 currency in business today, and you need momentum for that digital transformation. And the big, they no longer eat the small. The quick eat the slow. The future of your company depends on it. It depends on action now, not 1 year from now. And success needs no explanation. Failure needs no alibi. Failure's not an option. It's go time.